إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Indeed, the best of speech is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the best of guidance is the guidance of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And the worst of affairs are the newly introduced matters, and each and every single newly introduced matter is a bid'ah, it is an innovation, and each and every single innovation is a misguidance, and all the misguidances are in the hellfire. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla for afiyah and salama minan nar. Allahumma inni as'aluka ilman nafi'an wa rizqan tayyiba wa amalan mutaqabbala. Amin ya Rabbil Alameen. طيب, ولله الحمد, we continue reading from the book بإذن الله الداء والدواء by Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala. And yesterday we discussed an introduction to the book by Ibn al-Qayyim, and we mentioned that a question was posed to Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala with regards to an individual who was afflicted with a calamity, and he identified that this calamity, if not dealt with, it will lead him to destruction fi dunya wal akhirah. And so you ask Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala the following question: فَمَا الْحِيلَةُ فِي دَفْعِهَا? How does one get himself out of the situation, and how does one basically come out of the situation? And then Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala responded with the response which we find in front of us in the form of this book. And he mentioned firstly that the Muslim must know that there's not a single disease except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sent down a cure. Allah Azza wa Jal created the disease, and He also created the cure. And as the Prophet ﷺ said, عَلِمَهُ مَنْ عَلِمَهُ وَجَاهِلَهُ مَنْ جَاهِلَهُ. Whoever knows it, knows it. And whoever is ignorant of it, is ignorant of it. And then Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentioned that the shifa which is found in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically, and the cure which Allah Azza wa Jalla sent down, it is general with regards to all ailments, whether it is physical or spiritual. Right? It encompasses all types of ailments, and in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala this cure is found. Ibn al-Qayyim then proceeds to mention وَقَدْ جَعَلَ النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ الْجَهْلُ وَالْجَهْلَ دَاءً وَجَعَلَ دَوَاءَهُ سُؤَالَ الْعُلَمَاءِ. He then mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ has made ignorance. He's made ignorance a type of disease that can afflict the Muslim, and he said that the cure for this illness is su'al al-ulama. Right? Su'al al-ulama. And this is of the types of ailments, or rather illnesses and ailments which pertain to the heart. Jahl is a marad of the qalb. And he mentioned that the cure for it is to ask the ulama. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ ذِكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you know not. He then mentions the hadith which has been narrated in the Sunan of Abu Dawud, the hadith of Jabir ibn Abdullah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, that he mentioned that a group of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ was upon a travel. فَأَصَابَ رَجُلًا مِنَّا حَجَرٍ. And so a person was thrown with a stone. And so the stone basically split open his head. ثُمَّ احْتَلَمَ. And then the person had ihtilam, he had a wet dream. فَسَأَلَ أَصْحَابَهُ. He then asked his companions concerning this matter, and he said, هَلْ تَجِدُونَ لِي رُخْصَةً فِي التَّيَمُّمِ. He said, do you find that I have a concession to take tayammum? So let's think about the situation. The person was afflicted, right? He was injured, and then he had an ihtilam. So what is upon him? He must perform a ghusl. However, considering the situation, the gash on his head, he asked, do you find for me a rukhsa, a concession? And they said, مَا نَجِدْ لَكَ رُخْصَةً. They said, we find no concession for you. وَأَنْتَ تَقْدِرُ عَلَى الْمَاءِ. And they said that you are able to use water. And we know that in the event when there's lack of water, You move to the replacement, which is tayammum. But also with regard to certain instances, when the person is unable to use water, he can also go to tayammum. Mathalan, the person has an injury on his arm, and he broke his arm and he's wearing a cast. Does he need to wash that part of his body? No, he can perform tayammum over it, or he can perform mas. Taib. So they say, we don't find any concession for you, and you are able to use water. فَاغْتَسَلَ فَمَاتَ. And so the person performed ghusl, and because he performed ghusl, he passed on. And so when they came back to the Prophet ﷺ, they informed the Prophet ﷺ of this. The Prophet ﷺ then said, قَتَلُوهُ قَتَلَهُمُ اللَّهُ. The Prophet ﷺ said that they were a reason for his death, so may Allah Azza wa Jal fight them, or may Allah Azza wa Jal kill them. The Prophet then said, أَلَا سَأَلُوا إِذَا لَمْ يَعْلَمُوا فَإِنَّمَا شِفَاءُ الْعِيِّ سُؤَالٌ. The Prophet then said, why did they not ask if they did not possess any knowledge? Indeed, the cure for ignorance is to ask. So that's why Ibn al-Qayyim said that the Prophet ﷺ, he made the disease ignorance, and he made the cure asking the ulama. Taib. And the Prophet then ﷺ said that it was sufficient for him to perform tayammum and to simply splash water on the affected area. Taib. So in this hadith we find, firstly, that giving fatwa based upon ignorance is a reason for misguidance. And we know in the end of times, the Prophet ﷺ, he spoke about the fact that the people, the lay people, will take the ignorant as leaders. طيب. فَسُئِلُوا فَأَفْتَوْا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ فَضَلُّوا وَأَضَلُّوا. So they will pose questions to these so-called leaders, and as a result of this, the fatwa which they give, these leaders, the fatwa which these leaders give, the Prophet said, فَضَلُّوا وَأَضَلُّوا. That they firstly will be a reason for misguidance, and they themselves will be misguided. And so we see that ignorance is a reason for misguidance. And not posing questions to the people who are in authority and the people of knowledge, the people who possess true knowledge, it is a reason for misguidance. This hadith, we also benefit from it, the fact that it is not permissible for the one who doesn't possess knowledge to give verdict. And verdict, in essence, it is the role of the scholars. Sometimes people think, because we've studied a couple of years, 6, 7, 8 years, then we think that we are able to give verdict. People, for example, like myself who's in this role, we simply relay the rulings of the ulama, but we don't give fatwa, because fatwa is the role of the scholars. So what about the person who has not studied at all, and questions get posed, and they give verdict, and they say this is halal and this is haram? This is only the role of the ulama. This is only the role of the ulama. Ibn al-Qayyim then mentions, فَأَخْبَرَ أَنَّ الْجَهْلَ دَاء وَأَنَّ شِفَاءَهُ سُؤَالٌ. He then mentions that the Prophet also informed us that ignorance, it is the disease, and asking the ulama is the cure for this disease. He then mentions the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that the Qur'an, in essence, is a shifa. Allah said, قُلْ هُوَ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا هُدًى وَشِفَاء. That say, O Muhammad sallallahu proclaim to the people that the Qur'an, huwa, here refers to the Qur'an, it is for those who believe a guidance and a shifa. Right? As for those who disbelieve in it, they do not attain this benefit of guidance, and they don't attain the benefit of the Qur'an being a shifa for them. So the fact that some people do not attain shifa, they do not attain cure by way of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doesn't mean that the Qur'an is not a book wherein there is a cure. Just like those who don't approach the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the angle of seeking guidance, and they are misguided by the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, doesn't mean that it's not a book of guidance. Allah Azza wa Jal says, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. It is a guidance for who? For the people of taqwa. And there are people who have excelled in the study of Islam. And these people are non-Muslims. And are even more well versed in Islam than many scholars and the Muslims. They've excelled in Arabic, they've excelled in the related sciences of Islam, but they don't attain guidance by approaching the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. So why is this? Because their niyyah is corrupted. Their niyyah is corrupted, they don't possess taqwa, so they don't attain guidance by way of reading the book of Allah Azza wa Jal and studying it. But does that mean that the book of Allah is not a book of guidance? Certainly not. It is a book of guidance. So, Ibn al-Qayyim mentioned this verse, قُلْ هُوَ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا هُدَوْا وَشِفَاء. He then mentioned the next verse, وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. That we have revealed this Qur'an, مَا هُوَ شِفَاء, wherein there is a shifa and a mercy to the believers. And so he mentions here, فَإِنَّ الْقُرْآنَ كُلَّهُ شِفَاء. Because the verse might be understood, for those who understand a bit of Arabic grammar, وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ, that we have revealed part of the Qur'an. And this could mean tab'id, meaning to show that part of the Qur'an is a shifa. However, Ibn al-Qayyim says, لَا لِتَبْعِيد, it is not for tab'id. Rather, the entire Qur'an, it is a cure. كما قال في آية الأخرى, as Allah Azza wa Jalla said in other verses, فهو شفاء للقلوب من داء الجهل والشك والريب. So he says that the Qur'an, it is a cure for the hearts from the disease of ignorance and doubt and rib. He then mentions فَلَمْ يُنزِلِ اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ شِفَاء قَطْ أَعَمُّ وَلَا أَنْفَأُ وَلَا أَعْظَمُ وَلَا أَنْجَعُ فِي إِزَالَةِ الدَّاءِ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ. So he says Allah Azza wa Jalla has never ever revealed مِنَ السَّمَاء, from the heavens, a cure greater or more general or more beneficial than the Qur'an with regards to removal of ailments and diseases. He says that this is from the miraculous nature of the Qur'an. However, we know that Allah Azza wa Jal has revealed books previously, such as the Torah, the Injil, the Zabur and the Suhuf, which was given to Ibrahim and Musa. And so he says, Shaykh Salih Fawzan mentions that in these books also was a cure. Taib. In these books, the previously revealed books in their pure form, there was also a shifa. But he says that the Qur'an is unlike any other previous book. Right? Because it is the ultimate cure. It is the ultimate cure. He then mentions وَقَدْ ثَبَتَ فِي صَحِيحَيْنِ مِنْ حَدِيث أَبِي سَعِيدٍ قَالَ. He then mentions the hadith which is found in Bukhari and Muslim. And we'll summarize this hadith inshallah. It's a lengthy hadith, the hadith of Abi Sa'id, when he said that a group of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ went on an expedition. And so they came to a valley where they decided to camp for the night. And so they never had any provisions with them. And very close by they saw a group of Arabs who had shelter and tents and so on. And so فَاسْتَضَافُوهُمْ, and so they sought any shelter by them for the night. But this group of Arabs refused them. And Shaykh Salih Fawzan mentions the fa'idah with regards to this matter. And he says that from the nobility of the Arabs and from their customs was to be kudos. That's what the Prophet said, مَنْ كَانَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ فَلْيُكْرِمْ ضَيْفًا. That whosoever believes in Allah Azza wa Jalla the last day, let him honor his guests. And this type of character was known amongst the Arabs. But yet they refused them. And so during the night, فَلُدِغَ سَيْلُ ذَلِكَ الْحَيِّ. So during the night, the leader was afflicted. And what was he afflicted with? He was stung. He was bitten by a snake. Right? فَسَأُوا لَهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ. And so they basically tried to help him and tried to medicate him with all means which was at their disposal. And so nothing benefited them. And so they said, why don't you go to those group of people who have camped out here? Perhaps they know of something that can benefit him. And so they came to them and they said, Ayyuha ar-Rahd, inna sayyadana ludikh. They said, our chief, Yani, was afflicted, he was stung. And we have tried everything in our disposal to help him. They then asked the question, فَهَلْ إِنْدَ أَحَدٍ مِنْكُمْ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. So do any of you know of a method that could help him? And so some of them said, Na'am. Some of them said, Na'am. And the person said, Wallahi inni la urqi. He said, I will do ruqya upon this person. Right? This is what the Sahabi said. However, he said, however, you refused to host us. And so he says, I will not do ruqya upon the person up until you make for us a ju'la. What is a ju'la? You give us some type of reward. And so they agreed upon a ju'la, some type of reward, which was basically a flock of sheep. And so the group went to the Sayyid, the leader, and then they did ruqya upon him. And he recited, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And so they say, فَكَأَنَّمَا نُشِتَ مِنَ الْإِقَالِ فَانْطَلَقَ يَمْشِي وَمَا بِهِ قَلْبَهُ. And so the person got up, the person was afflicted, he got up and he walked as if nothing was wrong with him. Right? And so he was cured. He was cured, and so they fulfilled their promise, and they gave them the flock of sheep which they promised. And then some of the Sahaba, they said, divide it amongst us. And the companion who did the ruqya said, I will not take any of it up until we go to the Prophet ﷺ and inform him what had happened. And then we will see what the Prophet ﷺ commands us with. And so they came back to Medina, they came to the Prophet ﷺ, and they mentioned to him what had happened. The Prophet ﷺ said the following words. He said, وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ أَنَّهَا رُقْيَةٌ. The Prophet ﷺ said then, how did you know that this is a ruqya? Right? Then he said, قَدْ أَصَبْتُمْ. The Prophet ﷺ said that you were correct in your judgment. To do ruqya upon this person, اِقْتَصِمُوا وَاضْرِبُوا لِي مَعَكُمْ سَحْمًا. The Prophet then said, divide the sheep and give me a share of it. Divide the sheep and give me a share of it. So why does Ibn al-Qayyim bring this over here? He brings this to prove the point that the Qur'an is a shifa. It is a cure. And this is the reason he mentioned the hadith at this place. Secondly, what we benefit from this hadith is that the Qur'an, it is a shifa, it is a cure for physical ailments as well as spiritual. Because if a person is bitten with a snake, what must he get? He must get antivenom, right? He must go to the doctor, he must seek help, he must seek assistance. However, in this case we see that this companion, he did ruqya upon the Sayyid, the master of this tribe, and the person was cured. And they said he got up and walked away as if nothing was wrong with him. We also benefit from this hadith that it's permitted for the raqi, the one who does ruqya, to take compensation for the ruqya. However, Shaykh Salih Fawzan says that this must not be his aada, meaning it mustn't be a job. And Shaykh Salih Fawzan says we shouldn't set up clinics where we basically treat people who are afflicted, so that it becomes a job, such as the doctor has a job and he has people who come to visit him, and then they prescribe medication. He says because this yufsidu ruqya, he says this corrupts ruqya, that some people will seek only a worldly gain from it. And secondly also, he says this will be a cause for people to step up who are not ahl for this task, meaning they are not the people who can do ruqya. As we know that some people, when they do ruqya, they don't use the sunnah method of ruqya. Rather, he said that sometimes people use shirk, a'udhu billah, in their ruqya. How? By calling upon other jinn and summoning other jinn to ward off the jinn that has afflicted the person. But what is ruqya in essence? It is recitation of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and incantations, supplications from the Qur'an. This is ruqya. also the Muslim should have an approach to ruqya where he does self-ruqya. And this is the basis. The asl is to do ruqya upon yourself. And how is it attained? That whenever you recite the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, you intend to recite it and get the reward, but you also intend that it is a ruqya. Also using the supplication which is found in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, which pertain to ruqya. Allahumma rabban nas, adhib al-ba'sa, ishfi wa anta shafi, la shifa illa shifa'uk, shifa'an la yughadiru saqama. And the likes of this. Taib. So it's not for every person to step up and do ruqya. Right? He also says that the raqi, the one who in the instance you seek ruqya from, his aqidah should be known as well as his knowledge. So sometimes you have people who never studied, but they undertake this task of being a raqi. And when you actually study their practice based upon knowledge, you'll see that they're busy with lots of deception. Right? Lots of deception. Such as the writing out of azimats and burning incense and asking the patient to do strange things. So the person who does the ruqya also plays a role in the effectiveness of the ruqya. And we're going to get to this point. Right? So the person's aqidah should be looked at. His aqidah should be sound. He should be a person of tawheed, a person of sunnah, and also his knowledge. He then mentions also that look at the approach of the companions, radiallahu anhu, that they said, give to us a flock of sheep. But they never divided it amongst themselves up until they referred it back to the Prophet ﷺ. And so this shows us once again the importance of referring our affairs to the ulama. And then the Prophet ﷺ, upon hearing what they did, he said, وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ أَنَّهَا رُقْيَةٌ. How did you know that it is a ruqya? So the Prophet ﷺ affirmed that Al-Fatiha is a ruqya, and he said, divide it amongst yourself and give me a share. And Shaykh Ridaah mentions, why did he say give me a share? Because once the Prophet ﷺ took of it, they will have no difficulty in also dividing it amongst themselves. Now, so this is a powerful hadith, right? And this is also where we get one of the names of the Fatiha from. Ar-Ruqya, the cure. And this is from amongst one of the most powerful cures a believer can use in his life. Ibn al-Qayyim says, فَقَدْ أَثَّرَ هَذَا الدَّوَاءُ فِي هَذَا. He says, so the effect of this cure, it was effective with regards to this ailment. وَأَزَالَهُ حَتَّى كَأَنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ. And it removed the ailment as if it did not exist. So I was thinking, Brother Khalid was able to give this example. But Uncle Ibrahim is also a hiker. So if you're an hike, right, and puff adders, Allah protect us, and the person gets bitten, what's our first approach going to be? It's called the emergency, right? That's going to be our first approach. But look at the approach of the Sahaba, because they had firm belief, and they had tasdeeq, and they had yaqeen in the fact that the Qur'an is a shifa, because Allah Azza wa Jal said that. So when we take the risk of reciting Fatiha upon the person, maybe in the meantime while we're waiting, but even in the meantime while we're waiting, if we have that approach, it means we don't truly believe that it is a shifa. You with me? So it removed the poison or the venom from the person as if it never existed. وَهُوَ أَسْهَلُ الدَّوَاءِ وَأَيْسَرُ. And it is the easiest cure, and it is the lightest. Here Shaykh Ridaah mentions that the reality of this is that if people depended upon the Qur'an as they ought to depend upon the Kalam of Allah Azza wa Jal, we'd be saving a lot of money, right? Medical aid, upon the opinion that it is permissible, right? In the necessity. Going to doctors and the like of this. If we use the Fatiha upon us, right, to cure ourselves, then we'll be saving a lot of money. He says, وَلَوْ أَحْسَنَ الْعَبْءَ التَّدَاوِي بِالْفَاتِحَةِ لَرَعَى لَهَا تَأْثِيرًا عَجِيبًا فِي الشِّفَاءِ. And if the Muslim, أَحْسَنَ التَّدَاوِي, if he uses the Fatiha correctly, he will see an amazing effect of it in his life. Subhanallah. Then Ibn al-Qayyim mentions, رحمه الله تعالى, وَمَكَثْتُ بِمَكَّةَ مُدَّةً تعتريني أدواء ولا أجد طبيبا ولا دواء فكنت أعالج نفسي بالفاتحة فرأى لها تأثيرا فكنت أصف ذلك لمن يشتكي ألما وكان كثير منهم يبرأ سريعا. So Ibn Qayyim now mentions tajrubah. He mentions his own experience and he says, and I was for a period of time in Makkah, and he said I was afflicted with various illnesses, and he said, and I did not find any doctor. So he says, so I used to u'alij nafsi, I used to cure myself and treat myself with the Fatiha. And he said, and I saw an amazing effect in his own self. And so he said that I used to prescribe this for any person who used to complain to me with regards to an alam, with regards to a pain, right? وَكَانَ كَثِيرٌ مِّنْهُمْ يَبْرَأُ سَرِيعًا. And a lot of them were cured very quickly. A lot of them were cured very quickly. So the ailments today, with the type of diets and foods we eat, it's a lot, right? The people have high blood, sugar, gout, etc. A cure for all of these ailments is what? Is the Qur'an, but specifically a chapter of the Qur'an which we all know, which is Al-Fatiha. And if we have true conviction in it, that it is a shifa as Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned, and we also use it in the correct manner, we will see amazing effects, just like those before us saw amazing effects. The likes of Ibn al-Qayyim, and to whomsoever he prescribed this, from amongst the Amat al-Muslimin, the general Muslims, and also the Sahaba. So we shouldn't think that this is something which is only for the companions. Yes, they had the highest level of faith and the highest conviction. And for this reason they saw the effects of the ruqyah in their life. But if we have the same approach as them with regards to it, we will see the same effects. We will see the same effects. So here Ibn al-Qayyim mentions something important, and he says, وَلَكِنْ هَا هُنَا أَمْرٌ يَنْبَغِي التَّفَتُّنْ لَهُ. He says, however, here is something that we all need to pay close attention to. And he says, وَهُوَ أَنَّ الْأَذْكَارِ وَالْآيَاتِ وَالْعَدِيَةِ الَّتِي يُسْتَشْفَى بِهَا وَيُرْقَى بِهَا هِيَ فِي نَفْسِهَا نَافِعَةٌ شَافِعَةٌ. So he says, all of the adhkar, which the Prophet also has mentioned to us is a ruqyah, as well as the ayat and the supplications, which is used as shifa and is used as ruqyah. He says, it in and of itself, it is nafi'ah, it is beneficial, and in it is a cure. He says, however, وَلَكِنْ تَسْتَدْعِي قُبُولَ الْمَحَلِ. However, the person who uses it also plays a role in this. So this is what Allah Azza wa Jalla said, وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا وَشِفَاء. We have revealed in this Qur'an that wherein there is a cure. This is what Allah Azza wa Jalla said. Now he's saying that the person that uses it also plays a role. And the person that uses it could be the person himself when he does self-ruqyah, or the person who does ruqyah upon him also plays a role. Right? And he says, وَقُوَّةُ هِمَّةٍ فَاعِلِ وَتَأْثِيرِهِ. And this relates to the raqi, that the raqi who does it must also have this firm conviction and this aspiration that it is effective. So he says, فَمَتَى تَخَلَّفَ الشِّفَاء كَانَ لِضَعْفِ تَأْثِيرِ الْفَاعِلِ. So he says, when shifa is delayed, it is not due to the fact that the Qur'an is not a shifa, but rather this is according to the weakness of the one who does the ruqyah. Naam. He says, أو لعدم قبول المنفعل, or the person who the ruqyah is done upon doesn't also accept the ruqyah. Right? So they say, now I rather want to go to the doctor. I rather want to take medication. The person says, no, try this. So the person is not convinced of it. Naam. And he says, أو لمانٍ قوي فيه يمنع أن ينجع فيه الدواء. He says, or there is a preventative factor which prevents the cure from working. And he says, كما يكون ذلك في الأدوية والأدواء الحسية. Just like this pertains to natural medicine also, or other medicines. At times the person who uses it also plays a role. The person, his body rejects it. Right? So we mentioned this previously. Two people have the same illnesses. Right? A certain medication is prescribed. it works on person A but not on person B. Why? Because of some physiological reason. Na'am? So this also plays a factor. And then he says فَإِنَّ عَدَمَ تَأْثِيرِهَا قَدْ يَكُونُ لِعَدَمِ قَبُولُ الطَّبِيعَةِ لِذَلِكَ الدَّوَاءِ. It could be as a result of the person rejecting this medicine or medication. وَقَدْ يَكُونُ لِمَانٍ قَوِيٍّ يَمْنَعُ مِنْ اِقْتِضَاءِ أَثْرَهُ. Or he says it could be for whatever other preventative matter. So he says فإن الطبيعة إذا أخذت الدواء بقبول تام كان انتفاع البدن به بحسب ذلك القبول. He says rather if the person takes wholeheartedly towards the medicine, then the benefit that the body attains from this will be according to how well the body accepts this. He says وكذلك القلب إذا أخذ الرقية والتعاوذ بقبول تام. Likewise the heart, if it takes towards يعني الرقى, the ruqya, and ta'awid, meaning the supplication which is used upon the sick person, biqabulin tam, with complete acceptance. He says وَكَانَ لِلرَّاقِ نَفْسٌ فَعَالَ وَهِمَّةٌ مُؤَثِّرَةٌ. And the person who does the ruqya is enthusiastic. He has the belief and the yaqeen that it works. He says أَثَّرَ فِي إِزَالَةِ الدَّاءِ. It will have an effect with regards to removing the disease. That will have effect with regards to removing the disease. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah moves on to a new topic, and that is the effectiveness of dua with regards to removing ailments. What ailments are we referring to? Spiritual and physical, right? Spiritual and physical. So we know from amongst the cure for sins, it is dua, right? A person, for example, does not have the inner ability, right, to leave off a sin by himself. And this should be the aqidah of a Muslim, right? Ya hayyun ya qayyum bi rahmatika astaghith aslih li sha'ni kulli wa la takillani ila nafsi tarfata ayn. Ya hayyun ya qayyum bi rahmatika astaghith, by your mercy I seek deliverance. Rectify for me all my affairs and do not leave me to my own self for the blink of an eye. And the blink of an eye is like the shortest moment that exists, right? So this is the aqeedah of the believer, is that he is under the qada and qadr of Allah Azza wa Jal. And he doesn't depend upon himself for attaining any benefit or warding off any harm. Rather, he is an abd. So with regards to sins, likewise, sometimes a person gives up a sin because he has this aspiration to give it up, but it's for a short period of time. But when he truly submits himself to Allah Azza wa Jal, and he uses a supplication which is found in the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he has yaqeen in this, coupled with his own intent to give it off, it will be more effective than him just simply giving it off. Whoever gives up something for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah replaces it with something better. Taib? So, from amongst the supplications which is mentioned, for example, Allahumma inni as'aluka fi'al al-khayrat wa tark al-munkarat. Oh Allah Azza wa Jalla, ask you for good deeds, right? For the ability to do good deeds. Wa tark al-munkarat, but also to give off and to give up all types of evil. So look at that supplication. The believer says that, coupled with him taking the means of abstaining from sins, such as knowing the evil repercussions of sins and knowing the evil consequences of it dunya and akhirah, and saying this dua. And then we said taking the means by not taking the pathway which leads to a destruction, it is more effective. So dua is from amongst the reasons which is a cause for giving up sins, right? Why? Because there are many verses which we know that speaks about the importance of dua. وَقَالَ رَبُّكُمْ أُدْعُونِي أَسْتَجِبْ لَكُمْ. Your Lord Most High said, subhanahu wa ta'ala, make dua to me and I will respond to you. That is the wa'ad of Allah. That is the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah Azza wa Jalla never ever breaks his promise. Do we have conviction in that? Right? وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ إِبَادِ عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ. That when My servants ask concerning me, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, say, فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ. I respond to the dua of the one who calls upon me when he makes dua to me solely. So Allah says, فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ. So let them respond to me by fulfilling what Allah wants from us, and let them firmly believe in me, so that they may be guided aright. And many verses like this, where Allah Azza wa Jalla makes clear to us the promise that He will respond to our du'as. Right? He will respond to our du'as. However, the segment that Ibn al-Qayyim is going to mention here now is he mentions to us reasons why dua is not accepted. And this is sometimes more important for a Muslim to know, coupled with him knowing that Allah responds to du'as. Because many are those who make dua, but at times people say, I've been making dua for this for so many years, but I haven't seen the ijabah. So one reason already for lack of response is if you are hasty in your dua. Another thing we must mention with regards to dua is how the ijabah manifests, how the response manifests. Because Allah said, Uda'uni astajib lakum. Make dua to me, I'll respond to you. But how does this response manifest itself? So it's either Allah Azza wa Jal grants you what you ask for. The exact thing you ask for, Allah Azza wa Jal grants you that what you ask for. And every Muslim, at the point in his life, he's experienced this. But there are also many things that we ask for which is not granted to us. Right? The second way the dua manifests itself is that Allah Azza wa Jal removes from your path an affliction the like of what you ask for. Right? So, you may dua for something, but Allah didn't give you what you asked for. Rather, Allah removes from your path an obstacle the like of what you asked for. So Allah removes the calamity from your life because of that dua you made. And this is also a manifestation of response. And if this doesn't take place, the third way of response, which is the best, is that Allah Azza wa Jalla stores up this dua for you and grants you better than what you asked in Jannah, right, in Akhirah. So Allah Azza wa Jalla always responds. وَقَالَ رَبُّكُمْ أُدْعُونِي أَسْتَجِبْ لَكُمْ. So Ibn al-Qayyim mentions here some reasons why du'as are rejected. And he says, وَكَذَلِكَ الدُّعَى. So he said firstly the Qur'an is a shifa. He said all as well as dua is also a means for at-takhallus min al-dhunub. It's a reason to get yourself out of sins and calamities. And he says, فَإِنَّهُ مِنْ أَقْوَى الْأَسْبَابِ فِي دَفْءِ الْمَكْرُوهِ وَحُصُولِ الْمَطْلُوبِ. It is from amongst the greatest means to averting anything which is disliked and attaining anything which is sought after. And this is why we make dua, to ward off evil or to gain a benefit. He says, وَلَكِنْ قَدْ يَتَخَلَّفْ عَنْهُ أَثَرُهُ. He says, however, at times the effects of the dua is not seen. He says, إِمَّا لِضَعْفِي فِي نَفْسِي بِأَنْ يَكُونَ دُعَاءً لَا يُحِبُّ اللَّهُ لِمَا فِيهِ مِنَ الْعُدْوَانِ. He says, sometimes due to the weakness of the dua or the weakness of the person, because he makes a dua which is not beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it contains some type of transgression. Like so asking for something perhaps which is not like to Allah Azza wa Jal, right? Or basically being excessive in dua in terms of the wording, right? He says, or at times also, وَإِمَّا لِضَعْفِ الْقَلْبِ وَعَدَمُ إِقْبَالِهِ عَلَى اللَّهِ وَجَمْعِيَّتِهِ عَلَى الْوَقْتِ الدُّعَى. He says, or due to the weakness of the heart and its lack of turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during dua. Because another reason, and Ibn al-Qayyim will bring this hadith, why dua is not accepted. Allah Azza wa Jalla does not accept a dua from a qalb, a heart, which is not present. So we're simply raising our hands and we are just saying words, like regurgitating words. Taib? This is qalb la, a heart that is not present in the dua. Allah does not accept such a dua. And he says, so all of these instances that he mentioned, فَيَكُونُ بِمَنْزِلَةِ الْكَوْسِ الرِّخْ جِدًّا فَإِنَّ السَّهْمِ يَخْرُجْ مِنُّ خُرُوجًا ضَعِيفًا. He says, the likeness of this dua is like that of a bow, right? A bow which is, it's flimsy. The bow is flimsy. So he says, فَإِنَّ السَّهْمِ, that the arrow, when the arrow is basically released from the bow, it doesn't have any strength in it. So likewise the dua, the person who makes the dua also plays a role in that acceptance of the dua. So he says, وَإِمَّا لِحُصُولِ الْمَانِ مِنَ الْإِجَابَةِ مِنْ أَكْلِ الْحَرَامِ, or it could be as a result of other preventative factors with regards to responding to du'as, such as أَكْلُ الْحَرَامِ, right? Consuming haram. He says, وَالظُّلْمِ, or it is a type of oppression that you ask for in your dua, or you've oppressed someone. He says, وَرَيْنِ الذُّنُوبِ عَلَى الْقُلُوبِ, or due to the fact that many sins have accumulated upon the heart, and this person making dua now, Allah Azza wa Jal perhaps will not accept that dua. وَاسْتِعْلَاءِ الْغَفْلَةِ وَالسَّهْوِ, and the overpowering nature of heedlessness and unmindfulness is all a reason for the lack of acceptance of dua. So he brings some narrations that proves this, and we're going to close with this. He says, as is found in the Sahih of Al-Hakim, however, Shaykh Al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala has declared this hadith to be weak. Right? So we'll mention what Ibn al-Qayyim has mentioned in another list. He said, Udu Allah wa antum muqinuna bil ijaba. He said, make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whilst you have conviction of response. He says, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَقْبَلْ دُعَاءً مِنْ قَلْبٍ لَهُ, and know that Allah Azza wa Jalla does not accept a dua from a heart which is unmindful. Right? From a heart which is unmindful. I should have a look at the grading of this hadith. Well, I mentioned Shaykh Albani has declared the hadith to be weak. Nonetheless, so he says, فَهَذَا دَوَى نَافِعٌ مُزِيلٌ لِلدَّوَى. So he says that this type of remedy is beneficial for the removing of the disease. وَلَكِنْ غَفْلَةَ الْقَلْبِ عَنِ اللَّهِ تُبْتِلْ قُوَّتَهُ. However, he says, if the heart is unmindful of Allah Azza wa Jal, it renders the dua to be weak. He says, كَذَلِكَ أَكْلُ الْحَرَامِ. He says, also consuming haram, يُبْتِلُ قُوَّتَهُ وَيُضَعِفُهَا. Right? It basically, it causes the dua to be weak. As is found in Sahih Muslim, in the hadith of Abu Hurairah, where the Prophet said, أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ طَيِّبْ لَا يَقْبَلُ إِلَّا طَيِّبًا. The hadith of the Prophet said that, O people, indeed Allah Azza wa Jalla is pure and He only accepts that which is pure. And then the Prophet said, وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ أَمَرَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ بِمَا أَمَرَ بِهِ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. And Allah Azza wa Jalla has commanded the believers with that which He has commanded the messengers. Right? يَا أَيُّهَا الرُّسُلُ كُلُوا مِن طَيِّبَاتِ وَاعْمَلُوا صَالِحًا إِنِّي بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ عَلِيمٌ. O messengers, consume of that which is pure, halal, and do righteous deeds. Another verse the Prophet mentioned, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُلُوا مِن طَيِّبَاتِ مَا رَزَقْنَاكُمْ. O you who believe, consume of the good pure things which we have sustained you with. Then the Prophet mentioned a man, Yutilu Safar, who is upon a lengthy journey, a lengthy travel. Ash'ath Aghbar, he is disheveled and is dusty. Yamuddu Yadahu ila Sama, and he raises his hands to the Sama. And all of these reasons here, it is a reason for response to du'as. Right? Person's upon travel, he's in a state of distress, right? He's disheveled and he's dusty, and he raises his hands to the Sama. And he also says, Ya Rabb, and he calls upon Allah Azza wa Jal, right? But the Prophet then says, وَمَطْعَمَهُ حَرَامٌ وَمَشْرَبَهُ حَرَامٌ وَمَلْبَسَهُ حَرَامٌ وَغُذِّيَ بِالْحَرَامِ فَأَنِّي يُسْتَجَابُ لِذَلِكَ. So the Prophet then says, however, the food he consumes is haram, and the drink that he consumes is haram, and the clothing that he wears is haram. So he is sustained and nourished with haram. So how will Allah Azza wa Jalla respond to such a dua? This is proving the point that Aklul Haram renders the dua to be weak. And this is something very important for us in these times. Because when times are simpler, the chance of you wearing clothing or eating food which is haram was much less. Right? Because the people used to own a few garments. But today, because shopping has become so easy, and we are enticed by this, and sometimes we can't afford it, what do? We buy things on credit, a'udhu billah. Clothing specifically. This is haram clothing. It's not like you're wearing pigskin or something, which is haram to wear, but wearing that clothing is haram. So perhaps the person bought a garment that is haram, why? On credit, and then he makes dua in that garment. Right? It's a reason for lack of acceptance. Food which is haram, a Muslim, well, no matter his state, and yesterday we were having a discussion on our way back home, is that people, no matter their level of iman, Muslims are always very conscious of what they eat. True? That's the one thing that they will be very, very strict on, despite whatever. However, at times people also buy food on credit. Right? That food is haram because it's bought on credit. Right? You buy it on your credit card, for example. And the drink is haram, and the clothing is haram, and the person is sustained with haram. So how does Allah Azza wa Jal then respond to such a dua? So, there are reasons also why du'as and adiyah is not accepted. And this is some of the reasons Ibn al-Qayyim has mentioned, and there are many, many others. So, at times people make dua and they say, I haven't seen the response. So we said, firstly, Allah responds to a dua as long as the person is not hasty. But there are also other reasons why du'as are not accepted. Right? It could be the first reason we mentioned, the way it manifests itself is different to what you thought it would manifest. But then there are also preventative factors that come into play with regards to dua. And so Ibn al-Qayyim mentioned in this segment the importance of dua, and he will go into more detail regarding this inshallah in the next segment bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. نكتفي بهذا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.